One day, as a 9-year-old Swedish girl was riding to town with her uncle in a lumber wagon, they came upon Henry, who was walking. The uncle stopped and asked Henry if he wanted a ride. Hannah, being shy of boys, crowded on over to her uncle. Henry said, "Don't be shy. Someday you will be my wife." My great-great-grandmother Hannah and Henry were then later married on April 12th of 1984, where it really all began. But a little backtracking of where my grandma came from. She was born in Roosevelt Community, Sweden, January 18th of 1866 on her parents' farm called New Hagen. I thought it was really interesting. My grandma had told me that every single farm in Sweden had their own name, kind of like our neighborhoods. She also had mentioned that both of her father and uncle worked for the king since no one was able to own their own lands. The women in Sweden did not work. They pretty much depended on the husband for a source of income. They took care of the house and the children. So when my grandma Hannah's father and grandfather later died, it was making it hard for her mother to provide for all of her children. So Sarah Lisa, Hannah's mother, now a widow of 5 children, ventured for a new life and was urged by her 2 brothers to come to America to join them. So that's what they did. Hannah was about 5 years old when her and her family traveled from Gothenburg, Sweden to Mitchell, Nebraska to live with her aunt and uncle. And about the crossing, my grandma Hannah had recalled that there was an Irish man who died along the way. And one night, there was a huge sea storm. The waves were huge, rocking the boat, and the sailors, being quite superstitious, had believed that the sharks could smell the death, and this was causing this huge storm. So what they did was they threw the body overboard into the sea, and as soon as they knew it, the sea calmed down. So they had lived in western Nebraska for quite a while with her family, and that is when she did meet her husband, Henry, as I had mentioned in the beginning. And a short 2 years later, after church one Sunday, there was a group of young men that were talking about this free land that was open for homesteading. So they went ahead and just took a train to eastern Nebraska, and in horse and buggy, they drove out to the available land over the state line. And after their return, Henry had made this remark saying that it was just lush grass, belly deep on the horses. The men had spent the entire winter there, setting up stakes, putting crops up, and building their sod houses, later to find out that there was a prairie fire and everything burned down. So the land had to be resurveyed. They put up new soddies, every man helping each other. And they lived on that homestead for about 9 years. And they had decided to take an additional tree claim February 17th of 1984. This tree claim came in 1973. The president at the time was President Grover Cleveland, and he had wrote this Timber Culture Act, which gave settlers deed to public land in return for growing trees in hopes that it would reshape the environment of the West, which was later then repealed short 20 years later because of some environmental and legal problems. My grandma had mentioned some of these problems were this terrible grasshopper plague, that they would just come in hordes, just these black clouds, and they would devour everything. They were eating the crops, they were eating handles on shovels, and they were even taking down the fence posts. So during the winter of 1895, circumstances got a little worse, so Hannah and her family moved to Los Animas, Colorado, to secure work in the mines, which later was followed by a terrible epidemic that hit the entire country. My grandma Hannah would say when there was sickness and death all around, she could always go in to see her baby, who was always smiling. So all the sickness and death was being caused by the typhoid epidemic that struck Colorado in 1906. All of Hannah's children took the fever, except for her baby Florence, who was 6 weeks old at the time. 3 of her children died, her 2 older daughters, Edna and Mabel, and her youngest son, Lester. No one could have really understood why Florence never got sick. Their best explanation was that my grandma Hannah was breastfeeding her, and just all that minerals and nutrients saved her life. And if she had died, then I wouldn't be here. And according to the Department of Commerce and Labor mortality statistics, in 1906, the number of deaths from typhoid fever per 100,000 of the population in Colorado was 56.0, which comes out to be 5,600 deaths in that year alone. So after the tragedy of the epidemic in the spring of 1913, everyone was talking about this open land in northwestern Colorado. So they had a short sale of all their livestock and all their household goods, and they moved to Brighton, Colorado, which her story ends September 26, 1952. That little girl from Sweden, at the age of 86 in Brighton, Colorado, passed away, having lived quite the life. She went through epidemics, plagues, economical obstacles, and even worse, the death of half of her children. She's an incredible woman from what I hear. And my great aunt Maud wrote this book, which is where I got most of my information about her. And I read this book, and she just sounds amazing. And I am extremely lucky to have been named after her. So the end. That is my speech. Thank you for watching, and I hope you guys all have a great winter break. Merry Christmas!